Hi, and welcome to the Design Systems podcast. This podcast is about the place where design and development overlap. We talk with experts to get their point of view about trends in design, code, and how it relates to the world around us. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Knapsack. Check us out at knapsack.cloud. If you want to get in touch with the show, ask some questions, or generally tell us what you think, go ahead and tweet us at the DS Pod. We'd love to hear from you. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Design Systems podcast. I'm your host, Chris Strahl. I'm here today with Jennie Yip from Atlassian. Jennie, you were on the program about 2 years ago. Welcome back. I'm so glad to have you back. I love these moments that we get to connect around these kind of fun inflection moments in your life.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
So tell me what's transitioned for you in the past 2 years. A lot's changed. And I think that this is interesting. You have a new title. You've got all sorts of stuff in your personal life happening. But tell me, what are the highlights?
So we actually did talk about 2 years ago, and I kind of looked at that and I was reflecting. I was like, wow, the team has grown. My role has changed. I'm having a baby, letting go of my other baby, my design systems baby. Yeah, our whole direction for the design system has gained a lot of momentum because we have a new vision and strategy. That's what I've been focused on the past 2 years instead of kind of executing the day-to-day. We've been slowly kind of building upon that foundation that we talked about the last time we chatted.
Yeah. So last time we talked, you were in a role where you were predominantly working on the execution of a design system. And yes, a leadership role in design, but still one of those roles that was predominantly focused on how do I build this thing? And now you're a design architect. And in that design architect role, you look a lot more towards the strategy of where's all this going? How does this represent strategic value for Atlassian? The last time we talked, the big focus that we had was on a lot of this idea of how do you tell better stories? I believe you either just launched or we're about to launch this new sort of foundational part of the design system. And you were gearing up for what that means to the business. You've gone from this one transition point of this older, more legacy design system to this new one. And now, once again, you're at this transition point where you're going from this role that was predominantly about let's build and execute a mature design system into one that thinks over a much longer time horizon. Tell me about that shift and what's gone on there.
It's been a big shift in altitude and roles for me. So back then I was a lead designer leading a project. We really set the foundation for Atlassian Design System with, combining everything into a new home. And so that kind of set and helped me understand a big broader view. And I think I was already touching on a whole bunch of systemic things we needed to invest in, accessibility, redoing all the foundations and all that kind of stuff. But I think what I learned a lot from that is we hadn't built the best strategy back then, because I was involved in that first kind of iteration of our strategy. But what I kind of learned is that was really just a whole bunch of us getting together, a whole bunch of leads getting together and creating a wish list. And so I called it our 10-year wish list because it was 58 things long, and we didn't really have any kind of tactics or strategy of how we should kind of go about them. And so actually some of the things that we talked about in that last podcast, we failed at. I think I had said, for example, we're investing in the foundations and we're we're going to do color and spacing and type and grid and layout, redo all of them. We were trying to do them all at the same time. And I think we had also touched on we're going to try and do accessibility. And so I think we had just too many things, not really focusing on what can we strategically kind of attack first to kind of get us going and lay another foundation to keep building upon. So been learning a lot about strategy and what a good strategy is.
I don't think you'd be the first team of ambitious driven people to have a list that was maybe a little too big and a little too ambitious. When you think about organizing people, one of the things that is really important is that process by which you kind of gather consensus around what you're building and why you're building it. But then when you think about how and in what order, that's where things get muddier, usually for most people. And that sounds like a lot of the transition for you has been, it's a little less about defining what this is about and a lot more about why we're building the things that we're building and why we're tackling it in this particular set of priorities.
Yeah. So I think right after we had chatted, I was thinking a lot about how do we, and this is why we had a bad strategy too. It's kind of you have a 30-person team. If everybody's looking in different directions, how can you get them to see and believe in the same thing and go in that same direction, right? I think that's when COVID was kind of like we were becoming very remote friendly. And we did a whole team wide workshop across 3 time zones to establish our values and principles. The whole purpose is that I know people were always like, oh, you need to start with design principles to align something. But basically, that was like our foundation. And we were able to grab everybody's input. You co-create this together. So everybody's bought in together as well and believes it. And so we always say the values are what we believe in. And then the principles are how we go about and behave to like kind of bring that stuff to life. So that kind of set our foundation for these kind of 3, I guess, pillars that we were calling them. So like we have 3 values and they're paired with 3 principles, and they're foundational, harmonious, and empowering for everyone. So they actually fall into these buckets of we want foundational parts. We want really strong foundations. Like I mentioned before, we want to invest in them. Harmonious falls into the product kind of space. So we were saying we want to build and mature that into something super harmonious. Like everything we use should fit together, work well, so it has a seamless experience, has a great API, etc. And then the third one is empowering for everyone. So this is where it comes into the people part of things. So we're thinking about people. What are the methods and systems we can provide them to kind of build their own local systems to scale up to systems and systems into a platform? We distilled everybody's thoughts into these 3 buckets, and that's how we've been kind of getting everyone to align in the same direction.
Yeah, I love the idea of you kind of want to pair like a method with an action. It's interesting, right? Because like it's similar to how we think about like our core values. Because you can't tell everybody how to interact in every single context and every single interaction. You want to create some sort of rubric or guidance for them. That concreteness of knowing that like there's an intent and then there's an action that represents that intent. My big question for you is like, has that worked? Have you felt like that sense of alignment really become present in the organization after that workshop?
So we kept building upon that. It's kind of funny. I feel like we did all the workshops in the wrong sequence, but they all kind of ladder up and down now, because after that, we set off to establish like a new vision and strategy, right? So it's exactly what you're talking about. We created a framework, and I think the thing is like when everyone's not speaking the same language, I realized all we really needed was creating that framework so they could actually see what we're seeing as well. And then to help them kind of like apply that framework is how we can kind of like get everybody to execute and be on the same page and to help bring that vision to life. So like the values that I mentioned, those 3 pillars, they actually also fall into our 3 horizons for our strategy and our vision as well. So everything kind of like maps up and down. We have this pyramid that we always use as a visual. And it goes from like aspirational stuff. So it's like vision, where we're going, values, what we believe in, our mission, why we exist, right? And the middle is kind of our strategy, so that we're kind of saying, this is the direction that we're going in, and these are our guiding principles. And then the very bottom of that is execution, which is like, this is how it will become tangible. These are the plans, action plans. This is what the team is empowered to execute and come up with their roadmaps to bring to life. So I think since we established that kind of framework, it helps everybody see the same thing, and it kind of helps us keep and create like boundaries. And I feel like boundaries is super important for systems as well, especially in enterprise scale, where there's so many different local design systems. There's so many different teams. As we've scaled from 5 products to now over 18 products, we can't do everything within our small team anymore. So we have to like figure out what are the methods and methodologies and kind of like ways of working that we can establish to help scale all of our thinking out to help other teams also operate and build their own systems the same way.
I love the idea of, you're kind of basing this a lot in empathy, right? Like that ability to create that shared understanding between people that are all about, moving in the same direction with this, right? And I think it's a really great way to get alignment is to think about the phrase getting others to see what you see. It boils down very nicely the idea of how strategy should function inside of an enterprise organization. How has that been for you to kind of like let go of this day-to-day work and be able to focus on that? I mean, obviously it's a big shift in your day-to-day, but do you find yourself still pulled towards that execution side, or are you really, really excited to lean in more deeply in that whole like building alignment and building a strategy and building a vision for the future?
vision is like a tool for alignment, right? I think everything in all those shifts that I was talking about, like one of my mantras for the past year was also like, let it go, let it flow. So I learned a lot about
Is that Frozen?
really
Is that the
it
song?
is.
Yeah, there you go.
It is. But it fits in totally with everything. But basically like really like understanding, and this is like what's been a big shift as well, is like we built a business case, right? We got reinvestment to build a team and grow the team and double the team from 2 to 4 teams. And so with that, say before I was the sole lead designer, now we have multiple leads across all the 4 teams. So then if I'm operating at a different level, at the architect level, then I need to let go of the day to day, right? And so I think it was really hard at first because I was like very much into execution and everything. But like when you think about it, like as you let go of those kind of roles and responsibilities in the day to day, you're kind of like making room for them to grow as well. And then I actually have space and like the mental, and also like I have a whole like other group of leadership that I work with now compared to like the team. And so I'm learning new things as well. So I'm also growing. So like letting go of that execution bit is like okay because you're actually executing in a different altitude and like communicating across and up a little bit more versus down.
I like that idea of like thinking about a different altitude, not least of which is because like, my altitude has certainly changed over the years and changed as just like being a part of a startup CEO, right? Like a CEO of a 5-person company is very different than a CEO of a 15-person company and very different than a CEO of a 50-person company. And one of the things that I've noticed personally with that is when you get that next level of investment in whatever system it is you're building, the challenge is like, yes, finding the right people, yes, determining what to work on, but actually getting everybody to work together actually becomes like a harder, more complex problem than the thing you're trying to ultimately reach as an outcome. And having somebody that is able to guide that and create that alignment becomes an essential role, largely because, you double the size of your team. Well, like that doubles the problem space and doubles the number of opinions and doubles all of the other complexities of just getting a bunch of people to work well together. And it's an interesting sort of shift from this execution mindset of like, I need to be in the code or I need to be in the design files or I need to be in the system that we're creating, to one that is all about like, let's make sure that we're all able to work together to build this thing together.
Yeah. There's a thing called Brooks Law where it's like talking about the number of people. And as you keep like exponentially adding more people to the team, all the lines of communication double, triple, like. And so that's exactly it. It's like we've doubled the team. It's almost like there's different crafts within the team now. So it's like there's like an operational craft, so business and operations. And then there's another kind of like the craft of design systems. So there's also we call ourselves the crafties. So I'm the design architect. There's an engineering architect, a content lead. So we have that triad, and a product manager and a PGM. The PGM and the PM sit across the people and business and operations team too. So that team is also like a head of design, head of engineering, product, and PGM that are shared, right? So if you can imagine, there's 2 tracks now co-leading the team. One's really focused on vision and strategy of the product. The other one is really focused on people, operations, and business, getting investment, getting buy-in. And then we work together and we're like a bridge and like a bench, leadership bench together. And so say, for example, the business case stuff that I was mentioning, it's like the people on operations track, they're kind of like working with execs to be like, hey, we need buy-in and we need investment to grow the system and grow the team because, we can't do it with such little people. Why? What's the ROI? Da, da, da. And then you have the group of crafties who are the subject matter experts who are working day to day and really good at executing, helping craft and provide that data for the ROI and stuff like that to help support that business case. So you can see how we can partner together to co-lead the team. And so now we also have 4 little kind of mini sub teams that are executing on the vision in different parts of the strategy. But that's how we've kind of like split up that responsibility, because as we've scaled, we just kind of like letting go as well, right? It's like before when I was the only lead, I was like, I have to do everything from all the details to all the way up to the big picture stuff, right? And then now we have 4 sub teams and you have a couple lead designers and lead engineers per team. Then they can create the roadmaps. They're empowered to like lead those teams and do the details as long as we're all aligned and going towards the same direction.
Yeah, it's no wonder you talked about boundaries being important, right? Because you have like a fairly complex org design for this. And as long as you're able to define like what swim lane or bounded like set of decision making people have ownership over, I imagine that's very effective because you have a lot of empowerment at the individual level or at the lead level to make decisions. And then you have like that supportive decision making structure between the four different groups of people.
Yeah, I think R&R is like roles and responsibilities across the different layers is super important. So we've been trying to like make it more effective. So like, every sub team kind of operates the same at least, because it doesn't make sense for them to kind of like make up their kind of like people and processes and stuff. If we want people to kind of like also swap around to be able to jump around teams or streams of work, they should also be pretty much the same. So it's kind of meta because it's like applying systems kind of stuff to the design system team as well.
Yeah, the more time I spend in the world of design systems, the more meta it all gets. We now have, a very mature design system for our design system software that powers other people's design systems.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a minute ago kind of your three horizons of growth. Just to get a sense of like when you talk about strategic thinking inside of your organization, you think about those three horizons. Like what do those horizons look like? Under like what time scale and what level of detail you're looking at across those time scales?
So the three horizons of growth is what our strategy is modeled after. Yet again, another framework. It's not a brand new framework. It is called the three horizons of growth and innovation. The interesting thing is like taking that apart and looking at how they apply in different ways. So basically, we're saying it's like a 3 to 5 year vision, right? There's different ways to look at it. There's like the now, the next, and the future. And then it's really interesting because you can break that down into, say, a 70, 20, 10% kind of like investment across the team. And so the most important thing about that is that we're always looking and working in each horizon a little bit, right? And thinking about that so that it's always kind of like evolving and moving towards the next horizon. So say our first horizon is called hardening the UI foundations. I mentioned this before. Like we need to redo all the subsystems, the visual foundations again. It's almost been 2 years. Like the color system has rolled out. Dark mode is coming, new theming system. So they laid a foundation basically for a new design token infrastructure and the theming system. So we actually have a light and dark mode coming out. And then that kind of like, laid that foundation for the next foundation, which is spacing. And so the spacing team kicked off and they're able to build upon what the color team built to kind of start building towards our, what we're calling primitives, which is like building blocks. So everything keeps building upon each other. So that Horizon one really focuses on like, we want to modernize and rebuild the infra and architecture and stuff. Horizon 2, like I mentioned before, is productizing the system. We want to turn it into a world-class product. We want to make all the parts of it fit together and they just work. The API is seamless across the whole system of like 60 plus components. And then we want it to help make the experience across all those 18 products in Atlassian harmonious. It has to feel Atlassian. It has to use the same foundational systems and build upon them. So they fall into the three pillars, right? And then the third horizon is called systems of systems. So 10% of our time is thinking about systems of systems, which is like, how do we scale what we've built in Horizon 1 and 2 out to empower everyone, empowers that third value, to be able to build stuff for themselves. We split the team into kind of that 70, 20, 10. So we have 2 or 3 teams on the foundations. We have one team on what we're calling Make Your Experience, which is making it super easy and harmonious. And then that Crafties team that I mentioned, that leadership team, is that 10% that's looking at the vision and future and strategy and stuff, system to system. So we're working across and up with other teams outside the team, right, to talk about their local systems. How can we standardize what should like the boundaries of a local or versus other systems and create systems and systems.
Yeah. So who are those other teams? Is that like folks at the product level? So like, are you talking to somebody at like, Bitbucket or Jira or something like that?
Yeah. So there's like different layers as well. So there's like, we have like our core team and then there's actually a platform layer. So there's shared experiences across products. So like cross-product collaboration requires like notifications or something. And so they have teams powering that as well. So they have platform teams, and then we have the product teams in the like outer layer. So we are talking to all of them.
Gotcha. So that platform team represents sort of the integrated workflows between the different applications, and then those actual individual product teams then, and everybody implements the design system.
Everyone builds upon our design system.
Right. That's probably a better way of putting it, because you're a foundational system, and then they have their own implementations that they build on top of that.
Yeah. So it's kind of like they're building their kind of local, we've been calling them local systems, right? So Jira is huge, right? So since they have a whole family of Jira products, now they're setting off to create Jira design system, because we have a Jira platform team, because it's so huge that they've formed a platform team to help them. They kind of come to us and they're like, okay, like we're interested in building the Jira design system. We know we want to use design system, Atlassian Design System as the base. What are your best practices? What are the methodologies you guys have been using to apply to, say, like build our Figma library? What's the API or the architecture? Should we use the monorepo? Documentation, like what are the best practices for writing great docs that are effective, etc. And so my team, when I asked them to think about Horizon 3 systems to systems, I'm like, so you guys have finished this chunk of work. How can we kind of tie this in a nice bow to think about how can we teach this to others, right? Because it's kind of like, I think usually people are just like, okay, we finished tokens or something. Let's, write about it really fast and write some directions and ship it. Like, here's the docs, that's it. But then the internal stuff, all the operations of like, what is the concept model of tokens? How do you think about when to make a token? How do you name a token? When do you, scale up to component level tokens or something? Like, all the other product teams aren't the experts. So if you guys are the subject matter experts, how do you multiply that model out to them?
So with the time we have left, I wanted to think about, you're in this strategic 3 to 5 year planning cycle, right? Like, a lot of this is about the structural aspects of the design system and reaching a level of maturity that I like to think about as like, I don't know, the promised land, right? Like, once you actually have a design system that's in place, it's well adopted, it's effective at delivering better products. What do you build on top of that? And in the context of Knapsack, I oftentimes talk about this as like getting design systems, infrastructure, and tooling in place is like the first step to a more interesting set of strategic work. And for us, that's things like generative design, and that's stuff like, how do you leverage data about your components to have better decision making around building the right products? What do you think about this at a strategic level? Like, once this foundation stuff in place, like, of course, there's the renewal and there's the continuing investment in it. But what are the big things that you're looking forward to taking on as you execute on this strategic roadmap?
Yeah. So you're talking a little bit about the strategies that live within Horizon 2 and 3 for us. So like the data and stuff that you're mentioning is like, are kind of like strategic themes we've been thinking about. Is like, that second one is really like meeting the makers where they are. So meeting the designers and developers where they are in their workflow. So we want to provide the best experience for them of using the system. And so that means we need to not only provide those methods and systems to help them build their own, but how can they just be super effective, be in the zone, be really happy and like want to use it. So it's kind of like creating and cultivating this culture around championing and really loving using that tool, right? And then there's a third horizon. So the themes around there is that conceptual model of like, what is a design system at Atlassian? Like, what are the boundaries? How do we establish what belongs in this system and then their local systems? But then the other part of it is this thing, and that's the generative part. It's not the same as generative design, but like, we're thinking about this theme of continuous evolution. So everything that we're building, all the tools that we're thinking about, we're thinking, how do we incorporate automation into it? How do we establish something? We also have this thing called pervasive IA, information architecture, that we want to make and establish across all the touch points of the system. But we also want to create, like, say, an API reference for all developers or designers creating their components, right? And so we're thinking about all those methods and systems that kind of contribute to automation, kind of like you adopt it once, build once, use forever, but adopt it once, evolve forever. Like, for example, the tooling side for the developers, they've been investing in code mods. So, this thing kind of like automatically takes you forward. That's kind of the theme we're thinking about. And so that's how all of them come together for us to form systems of systems. It's like cultural part where it's like we want to get people to love it and want to, champion it. Then there's the tooling part where it's like more automated and takes you forward and helps you like evolve with us. And that's why it's so hard to describe systems of systems for us, because it's like a combination of all the things. And it's like really like based on how we all work and interact and build those relationships with people to kind of want them to invest and adopt and build it with us.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about it like that too, because one of the things that Evan and I used to talk a lot about was design systems and all the things that you build on top of them have to feel natural to the people that use them. And it has to be like a path of least resistance, right? It needs to feel like this is the easier way, and so much easier that it doesn't make any sense to continue with old habits. And that's a really challenging bit of complexity to hit on. And it does involve a lot of like human empathy and the ideas of how people work, right? Because for most people, like tools and processes, they're kind of religion almost, right? Like there's this like, deep attachment to the way that things are, or feeling comfortable or knowledgeable in the way that you do something. And the things that we're talking about implementing, like systems of systems and different tools and automation, it changes all that for people. And that can be really sort of terrifying. And so when you think about like the human adaptation here, what is on the strategic roadmap beyond the tools and the ideas to actually get people to be really excited about this stuff? You talked a little bit about like having two teams, and one team was about that evangelization. Is that the method that you get people to convert, or is it something more organic than that?
That is one of our things too. It's like building an advocates team that can kind of like focus on evangelization, education, upskilling education, like just full-time empowerment. That's future, but it really is just like, building relationships with people. Like there's different ways, right? So like personally, I've been working on a vision video. So it's like we've created this vision strategy. We've been trying to evangelize it. And then how do you kind of like distill all these like complex, dense topics into like something that's inspiring and want to get people to like use the system? So, I have all the different teams, as they're launching tokens and spacing and color and stuff, they're engaging each team that comes to us, each product team, to pilot with them to, here's how you use tokens, here's how you apply them, here's how it makes your life better. And those teams become so like, they're just like, this is amazing. So they kind of like become our teachers, right? And so I've been talking about fishing a lot because of that quote of like, like you give a man a fish, you feed them for a day, and then you teach them how to fish, you feed them for a lifetime, right? So we've been using that kind of like analogy to be like, how can we just, again, like multiply our methods and our mindsets to others? And it's really just, working with them, like co-creating with them. When we pilot with them, we build a relationship. They love using it. We listen to their feedback. We evolve it. They feel bought in. It's like cultivating culture, and super interesting. And so that's like an invisible kind of like systemic underlying thing that is like hard to shift without doing all the work before. The vision video that I mentioned is like more of a tangible thing. So it's just like, how do you tell a story to really show the future about what's coming and really get them excited? So we also like spend a lot of time kind of like honing down those super complex topics, because it's like you introduce something like design tokens to this 10-year-old system. We turned 10 this month also.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah. And so it's like, how do you introduce, like I think I talked about how do you slip a new foundation into an old house last time. And it's just been like, how do you introduce something so common to us in design systems, like design tokens, to like a whole organization that has no idea what they are? So like we have to think about interesting ways. It's almost like marketing.
Right.
We're doing some internal marketing as well. Yeah. So it's a combination of all those things.
Well, Jennie, I love this conversation because it's just shown how much you've grown and changed over the past 2 years. And I want to just like extend a personal thank you. As you know, last month we crossed 100,000 listens. You were one of the first guests to be on this show, and just want to say a very heartfelt thanks. Those early interviews, different and maybe rougher as they were, really paved the foundation for this podcast. And you were a big part of that. And so I look forward to having you back again, where we can talk about the next evolution sometime in the future.
That's so great. And congratulations. I'm really excited for everyone.
Awesome. Well, hey, great to have you on. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
That's all for today. This has been another episode of the Design Systems Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or a topic you'd like to know more about, find us on Twitter at the DS Pod. We'd love to hear from you with show ideas, recommendations, questions, or comments. As always, this pod is brought to you by Knapsack. You can check us out at knapsack.cloud. Have a great day.